Hello, and welcome to Learning Music with Pat. I'm going to start off by showing you how music is put together. If you're new to music and you're just learning, this may be interesting for you and you may be unfamiliar with it. You know, people just write music and if you're playing a single instrument like clarinet or saxophone or recorder, whatever it is, you get music that's one-line music and you don't get a lot of extra things with it. But if you're in an orchestra and you have a score, you may have several parts in front of you and you choose the part that's right for you to play, but you've got all these other parts too. That can be confusing if you're not used to it. Now, the music that I'm going to show you as an example of what I'm teaching comes from the Messiah, and I used to sing in the Messiah as a soprano every year, and this is part of the score that we had. Now, let me define what a score is. A score for a conductor, or even for the people who are singing or whatever they're doing in the production, it's a group of pages of music, like a book of music, and it has all of the parts in it. So you have not only your part, but other parts too, and you can read off whatever parts you need, but the other parts are also there. So this would be part of a score. Now, the Messiah score is like maybe an inch and a half thick, and it's filled with music like this, and it's a regular book. I didn't bring the whole book with me. I didn't want to carry the whole book with me, but it's all filled with pages of music in a book, and it says, you know, Messiah, Handel's Messiah, and it also says score on it. So you know you're getting all of the parts. So let me show you this. This is actually only 2 lines of music. It looks like a lot more. You have right here, I want to point out to you, this would be the organ part. This is the melody of the organ, the alto and the soprano, and then you have the tenor and the bass on this line, and there's a line there, and this is the accompanying instrument. The others are all singers' parts. So it's explained well. This is Jesu Word of God Incarnate. That's the name of the song. This is the soprano line. This is the alto line. This is the tenor line. Notice the tenor is singing off the treble clef, not the bass clef, because tenors are very high-pitched voices. And then, of course, the bass. And that's a line here. That line puts them all together. They're all being sung at the same time. In this case, you have 2 measures of full rest, and then they all come in together. I can tell that because I'm reading the score here. And these are all the rest signs. They're all 4-beat rests. This is all 4-beat rest. You can tell because, and I don't expect you to be able to see this very well, so just kind of trust me as I tell you. There's a little black spot that you can see on top. All of these, they are 4-beat rests. They come down from the 4th line up. If they were on the 3rd line and they were going up, they would be 2-beat rests. But they're down from the 4th line, and so these are 4-beat rests. And everybody has those rests. Nobody's singing. Then when you get to the 3rd measure, this is the 3rd measure, everybody comes in. Now the organ, of course, is playing all the time. It doesn't get that 2-measure break. It's playing all the time. With Messiah scores, it's interesting because sometimes you'll come in on a beat and a half. You know, it's usually a whole measure, but sometimes you'll come in on a beat and a half, or a fraction of a beat, or something like that, which makes it more complicated. So here's one line of music. This is the piano or the organ part. Here it says organ, but pianos could play it too. And then here is the 2nd line. All of these are the singer's parts. So basically, you're getting 2 lines of music on a page. Now, if you were the conductor, the Messiah has an orchestra. It doesn't have flutes, but it does have trumpets, harpsichords, violins, you know, and cellos and so forth. So it has a number of instruments. The conductor would have to know what every instrument is doing. So their score would include all of the instrument parts. It wouldn't have the organ or the piano part because he's conducting an orchestra. It would have all of the orchestra parts in it. And that can get quite complicated. For example, supposing you have the score for the trumpet parts. Well, you might have 3 trumpet parts. You might have a solo trumpet part, the first trumpet, then you have the second trumpet, then you have the third trumpet, all of them playing trumpet, but all of them playing different parts. The first trumpet would be the most difficult, the second trumpet more harmony, and then the third trumpet less difficult as you go on. It may be just 1 and 2, or it may be 1, 2, and 3. And you notice the violins, when you go to a Messiah concert or a regular concert, there are a lot of violins, but they're not all playing the same thing. You have the solo violinist, you have the first violinist, that would be the solo violinist, then you have the second violinist, the third violinist, and you may have several people playing each individual part. So you could have an orchestra with 15 violins, and they're all playing 3 different parts. And then the conductor has got to have the score for all of them, because he's got to know what every instrument is doing. How come? He has to cue them in. If you, like for here, these are rests. No one's singing here. When it comes time for them to come in, he has to cue them in. That is, he has to give them a signal. Now is time for you to come in, and he does that with his hand motions. And then when they stop singing, then he would cue them out. He would stop them from going any further. They would, of course, know that anyway, because they would have practiced their parts. But if they didn't, this is a reminder. This is where you begin. This is where you stop. Now, when you have the Messiah, you have several singers in different parts, and some of these parts are intertwined, and they get very rambly. There's a lot of them. So therefore, it's easy to get confused if you're not too familiar with the music and come in on the wrong part. But the conductor shows you how not to do that. Conducting is not just sitting there with a beat pad and having a great time. It's hard work. You have to know what everybody's doing. You have to know when they come in, when they stop playing, what parts they are playing, and it gets to be very confusing, and it gets to be very complicated. Also, you have the dynamics. When do they get loud? When do they get soft? When do you cut them off, you know? So at any rate, this gives you a chance to see how complicated it can be. Now I'm going to put this down, and I'm going to put this up. This is another part from the Messiah. And you can see everybody singing all at the same time. This is in the key of D. The key of D has 2 sharps. And so, and in fact, the whole thing is in the key of D. And so you have your treble clef, you have your key signature, and you would have your time signature. I'm trying to see where that's written in here. It may be just written in the beginning. Let me just take a look. And I'm going to put this up one more time to show you something. This here, I haven't talked about this much in classes like this, but that's a C. You can, all the way down is C, and then it stops here because now you have the time signature, and they don't keep repeating it and putting it in on every line. Sometimes they do, but sometimes they don't. That C is the same thing as 4/4 time. It's just an easier way of writing it. I usually don't do it. I usually stick with 4/4 time when I'm writing music for the show, because I need to help you count it out so you can understand what the timing is and what the half notes are and what the quarter notes are and so forth, and you need to know that. But that C, if you ever see it, is really the equivalent of 4/4 time. And you notice in the second piece I put up, it's not repeated. It's repeated in the beginning, but it's not repeated. But by that time, you know it's 4/4 time anyway. And here are the 4 parts, and a soprano, alto, tenor, and bass. Now, it's really interesting in some music, but not in all music. When you have a stem that goes up, you're playing a melody or a soprano part. When you get a stem that goes down, then you're playing a tenor or a bass part. But that's not universally true, so I don't want you to get hooked into that too much. But you can tell if you have a piece and there are like 2 and it doesn't appear to be on this music. Well, there is more here. You probably can't see this, and it's okay if you can't, but here you have a half note. Some of them sticks up, some of it sticks down. Some of the stems go up and down. If you were playing more like a melody part, it would go up. The basses go down. The tenor and basses go down. Why I say it's not universally true is the fact that when you're writing a note, if you write a note that is down on the lower part of the staff, the stem usually goes up anyway because it's easier to read. And when you write a note that's on an upper part of the staff, usually the stems go down. It's just an easier way to read it. So this gets complicated. It gets very complicated. Now I want to also go into the way that I've talked to you about 8 VAs. I've talked to you about the way the ledger lines are. I made a couple of charts that I wanted to show you. This one in particular, if we can bring that one up. I can see it fairly well where I am, but just to bring that up, I can move it if you need to have it moved. So he's going to get that up. It's interesting to see what those ledger lines are. Thank you, that's great. All of these lines here they kind of go across, those are all called ledger lines. And they tell you, they're really shortened staff lines. In other words, I could take this is a C, it's a high C. I could take that line and I could draw it all the way across. It would be the same thing. It would just be another staff line. But because in the end you would have so many staff lines that when it gets above the regular 5-line staff, they shorten it and they call them ledger lines. And so you have these little markings. And if you were to look at regular notes, the body of the note, now I'm pointing to a note that I should have colored in because it's got a flag on it, but I didn't. But anyway, this is the body of the note. This would be the stem, and this would be the flag. Now, if I had hash lines in here, that would tell me where the note comes on the staff, if it is below or above the staff, and I'd be able to read it. Here is the middle C. I've talked a lot about middle C. It's halfway between the bass clef and the treble clef. It's halfway between. It has that in it, that line that's across it. I could draw that line all the way across, and I would have another staff line. Instead of doing that and making that staff, which is normally 5 lines, more confusing than it needs to be, I just put the ledger line in here. Here's your mid-range C. Here's your high C. Notice it has 2 ledger lines, one in the center of the instrument cutting through it, the other right underneath it. And this is the C above high C. Notice there are 5 ledger lines. Well, what if you want to go even higher than that? They don't write music higher than that. But just as an example, I wrote out what the next C would be. It would have 9 ledger lines on it. And the last one would cut through it, and it would be so difficult to read, you'd stare at it, you'd wonder what it was. Nobody writes for music above the C above high C, because there are too many ledger lines involved, and you'd be staring at it and counting ledger lines to know how high it is. Instead, they use that form, 8 VA. 8 VA means play the music an octave higher than it's written. So if you play this an octave higher than it's written, this is what you get. But it's not written that way because it's too difficult to read, especially if you have a lot of notes and the music is going fast. It's just plain too much. So you can read this, you know that's a C above high C. It's not so hard to read the 5, but you don't want to read it any more than that. You don't want to read like 9 ledger lines or 10 ledger lines. This is just, I just brought it down, the music down. This is a G. It's right above the staff. There's no ledger line. The A comes above that, one ledger line. The B still has one ledger line, but instead of going across it, it goes underneath it. Then you have the high C, which is two ledger lines, one across it, one under it, and then you have the D, which is still two ledger lines, but here it's underneath that D, and then there's a ledger line below that. And so that's the way it goes. One line, when you consider the line and the space, really gives you two notes for higher notes. And so what if I put this all together? What if I drew ledger line, a staff line, for all of these notes that were above the staff? What would I get? I would get a staff that looked like this. How are you going to read it? If you had music and I put music in front of you and I'd say, play those notes, and what you got is a mess of lines. No way that you can read it, but you'd have to take my word for it. This would be the middle C. It's the same as this C here, but I drew a line all the way across and made it a staff line instead of a ledger line. This is the mid-range C. It's the same as this one there, but it would be hard to press to know that if you're looking at music quickly. This is going to be the C, this is going to be the high C, and there would be a line across it and the line underneath, but it's hard to read already. It's going to be the same as this one. Then this is going to be the C above high C, and it's going to be this one right here, and this is going to be your 8 VAC. You know, where you put the 8 V8 and you play it an octave higher. It's playing this an octave higher than it's written, but I wrote it out, and this is where it would be. This is all bass clef. So you have all of the lines. I didn't count them, but there's a mess of lines here, and that's what you have to, this is what you have to work with. Now, does that seem complicated to you? It's already complicated, and even me doing it, and I knew what I was doing, it would be hard for me to read this. I wouldn't know that that was a C, this is a C, this is another C, this is another C, and this is the 8 VAC, the highest you can get. So the flutes, and I want to show you, I'll have this, I'm going to put this down for a minute. This just shows you the complexity of it all. Let me put this up. I make my own charts because there's no way I can buy charts like this, so I make my own. It's a little home style, doesn't look sophisticated enough, but it shows what I want to show you. And when we get this up, okay, that's very good. This is the middle C. Whenever you have two black lines, two black keys, and it's repeated, two black here, two black here, two black here, and down here you have these two, this two, these two. The note right next to it is going to be a C, always. And I colored it in just mainly to make it more visible. You look at a keyboard, and this little key next to the left of the two black keys, closest to the center of the instrument, is going to be middle C. And middle C is going to be right here on the staff. That note is this note, which is this note. Now, oftentimes when I bring in keyboards for you to see, I only have 2 octaves because you don't need to look at all of this if I'm trying to point out something here. But you need to know that when I show you a 2 octave keyboard, that I'm starting with middle C, which is right here. The lowest note happens to be middle C, and I'm going up 2 octaves to this. And that section of the keyboard is what the recorders and most of the woodwinds play. Most of the woodwinds cannot get below this middle C. So to call for the woodwinds a low C, but it's the same thing. This would be one octave, and the instruments that could play would be like the flutophones, song flutes, tonettes, and some pan flutes, some of those simpler instruments. And the recorder, the sassotos, the penny whistles, some of the other more sophisticated, simpler instruments can get that whole 2-octave range. And the regular flute and the piccolo can get up to this here, which is the C above high C. They can go up here, but they can't go any further. So the flute, it does not go below this middle C. It goes right here. This is the lowest it can get, and they can get a 3-octave range all the way up here, which is a lot. And these are all the 8V8 notes that some piano players play, but nobody writes for it. Instead, they will take this section right here, they'll put that 8VA, and you play all of those notes an octave higher. And what do you get? You get these notes here that it's too complicated to write for them. But the flute goes up to that C above high C, and which would be right here, and it doesn't go any higher than that. And that's a lot of notes. Now, it would seem like some of the smaller instruments, like the tonettes and some of the pan flutes, song flutes, and those instruments, the flutophones, wouldn't be able to play very much. But if you look carefully, they can play quite a bit. But they're limited to an octave, maybe an octave in one note. Excuse me. So, but it keeps repeating: C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. It all repeats. And so they're playing within their range, and instruments that can play more are either playing higher or lower, but it's basically the same note, just within an octave range, up or down. So therefore, since it's all repeated, you actually can play a lot. And it's interesting to see that. So at any rate, I wanted to show all of that out to you. And a regular score, the conductor has everything, all the parts: trumpet parts, violin parts, piano parts, organ parts, trombone, French horn, clarinet, you know, all of the parts, saxophones, flutes, all of the parts are recognized. So therefore, their scores are very complicated. And when you take like a regular part of it, like a opera or something like that, or the Messiah, which happens to be an oratorio, you can get a pretty thick book. But it's all of the melody lines plus all of the parts that everybody is either singing or playing has to be recognized, and the conductor has to know it all. I mean, they memorize those books, so they know exactly where somebody comes in and where they don't come in, and you follow the conductor, because if you're singing and you're not used to it, and you're not used to a piece, you really depend upon the conductor to show you what to do and how to do it, because if you don't, you can get terribly mixed up. So that's what I wanted to show you, also the various ledger lines and what they mean and all of that. And I see that we're getting a little bit low on time here. Well, let me show you one more thing, though, before I let you go. Take a look at this. All of these are staff lines. The melody, the treble clef are from this little treble clef sign on up, and from the bass clef on down. So if I put the bass clef and the treble clef together without any spacings between them like you would normally have, you get a double staff that looks like this. How are you going to read that? This is the low C. This is the mid-range C. This is the high C. This is the C above high C. And if I had wanted to write more, I could have gone up and written an 8VA, which I didn't do. But look at all of that. How are you going to read it? You notice there's no ledger lines, but they are, really, they're all staff lines. And if I show you the other side of it, you get something like that. Very hard to read. It would be impossible to read. So instead, they use little ledger lines instead of the staff lines when they get above and below the 5-line staff. Now, we are kind of out of time. I'm going to close it here, and we'll do something else next time. Please join me then.